Hello, baby yum-yummers, and welcome to yet another expert interview. Today, I don't have a celebrity sitting here, as gorgeous as she is. This is tell our viewers Dr Mpume Zenda, gynecologist and obstetrician. Welcome, you gorgeous lady.
So I am
you've got nice energy.
Can I be greeted like that all the time?
That's so good in you. Very good.
So
what I would love you to do,
I'm a mom, I'm a woman, I'm a daughter, a real person, and how I got into the work that I do, and that's why I started with I'm actually a woman. I have period pains. I get periods too. Is first and foremost, it was really understanding or having a misunderstanding of my own body, you know, as a growing teenager. And then I think when I was pregnant with my daughter, I remember sitting at Baragwanath Hospital doing ComServe.
Oh my goodness.
And having a fat chat with a pregnant woman, and I was pregnant, and I thought, I could do this. This is nice. The only difference between myself and them is just that I did a bit of time at medical school. But also it made me realize just how much we didn't understand our bodies as women. And I think that's where my passion really started to kind of brew. When I would get into relationships, I also then realized we talk about this whole thing about pregnancy, about relationship, romantic, whatever. But nobody talks about sexual pleasure. And I think, as life would have it, my lifeline, Professor McIntosh, kind of somewhat dropped into my life, probably the most amazing sexologist in the country. And I was very fortunate to have her as my mentor. And I fell in love with it. And it really, for me, lined up, because whether we're going from teen puberty to reproductive age to perimenopause, intimacy somewhat kind of comes in there. And I thought it would be nice if we could get comfortable with our bodies, with our sexuality, but also being able to have the conversations that we need to have, especially when things are not going the right way, and be able to communicate and advocate for ourselves as women.
I agree, and it's an interesting point that you say, because when things do go wrong, it's almost like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Yes. No one else has got a vagina. No one else has had this problem. I'm just going to Google it, and I'm going to get completely the wrong information from Dr. Google. So it's amazing to have a safe space, and I think that's what you create.
Yeah, absolutely.
A safe space with your patients and with your audiences, because I know you do a lot of talking gigs that we'll talk about just now as well, to actually give people that empowerment to love their bodies, to appreciate their temples, and to be able to ask those questions as well. And interestingly enough, and I'm very comfortable with myself, but still I had an incident a few months ago where I had a tampon stuck inside of me, and I was like, ooh, what do I do? I'm going to Google.
Did you?
I did Google, because I had to try and work out how to get it out. I eventually got it out.
Okay.
Eventually, 100%, but it was no easy feat. So again, I think it's important to have someone on speed dial, someone that you trust, and someone that you can talk to about those kind of things. Because it's not just, it's also not just about what happens in a situation where you discover something or something's not going right. It's the aftermath of what you need to do after that. And that goes through everything in your entire life journey. That's so important for me. So what does your typical day look like?
Oh, I must say, I actually don't have a typical day, because very often it is literally different from one day to another. For example, today I'm out of office. This is still work for me.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's out of office. And I think what I've loved with particularly private practice is I think I'm an out-of-the-box kind of specialist, in the sense that I've always looked at women's health as it's not something that lives only, in the walls of hospitals, in the walls of our, medical practices, but it is people out there real and living. And I think from a very early stage, I'd made a decision. I said to myself, are you going to be a people's doctor, or are you going to be a doctor's doctor? And you know what? I have no issues with people who are academics, who are writing research papers. They are doctors. They write stuff that, helps us to be better. They're educating us.
Yes.
But for me, where my passion really lied was really taking what we carve out in our medical textbooks and research papers and saying, how do I make this very palatable for somebody who's out there at home? Because ultimately, who is our client.
Correct.
It's the person sitting out there. And so I think on a typical day-to-day, in all its differences, I love days where I've got theater, whether it is delivering babies, whether it is helping somebody maybe with fibroids or whatever gynae, issue. I love days where I am literally just consulting. For example, yesterday it was just from morning until jam-packed, and it is a combination, and I love that too. And what's nice now is I get the combination even in consultations where I'll get the pregnant couples, I'll get the gorgeous 30-something old who's like, I don't want kids. I just want to make sure that my things are right.
100%.
So the gynae. But also what's really been coming through is I get the couple who is struggling with sexual intimacy, and to sit there and know how to navigate the different spaces. Every now and again, I do get to go behind cameras, sort of like this.
Yes.
And what I've also loved is being in spaces that are non-threatening. Like August, I didn't realize how busy I would get, because now I do a lot more of the speaking engagements, and not from like, oh, it's a speaking engagement, but more like, hey, I'm just a girl. Let's have a conversation.
All of the same problems.
Yeah. So it doesn't matter where you throw me. All of these places, or all of these spaces, really do feed, sort of like that passion for me. That passion thing. And
so at the core of that passion, what would you say your mission is in life?
My mission definitely is, I always say, I love seeing women just feeling okay and understanding themselves, so that they can go out there and live their best life. Like, our womanhood should never be an interruption or something that we have to work around. You know, when they say get out of your own way. And so very often, whether it is the way that we see ourselves, whether it is the way we think we smell, or we should be smelling, like roses.
No.
Whether it is we are struggling because we are struggling in our intimacy at home, or we are going through the transitions of our womanhood. None of those things should ever be something that becomes a hindrance to who we are designed to be. Go live your life out there. I'll sit here and make sure it's sorted out so that you can go and be great and amazing.
Well, you must have very interesting dinner table conversations.
Yes,
I can
very much.
I can just imagine. Tell me about you in your family. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you've got a daughter.
Yes.
And she was one of the inspirational causes for your book that you launched.
Absolutely.
And I've actually got your book here, so I'm just going to show everyone. It's called Mummy, My Body's
or
Changing.
Daddy, for that matter.
A Girl in Bloom's Trusty Handbook for Growing Up. How amazing is this? I don't know if you can have a look there. Now, when you first told me about this book, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it was perfect timing, because my daughter was going through this stage of life as well. And for me, you can just see it's a beautiful little handbook. Tell us what this book is about and why it's different to other books that deal with My Body's Changing.
I think from both a personal story, it's a generational thing as well. My mother, and I was really grateful because she did write a foreword for us. She insisted, I'm going to write it in Zulu. You can translate it if you want. And I was like, okay.
As if you didn't have enough work to do, right?
Yeah. But for me, what was really the key thing going through my teenage phase, my mom is, now retired. My mom is a midwife, and I mean, we get exposed to it because
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah,
sure.
because we would then kind of come from school, drop off at her work to wait for her to knock off, but I would see her just interacting with young people, and I thought, this is amazing. One day when I get my period, my mom is going to be, I'm going to get like this amazing chat. And I was so thoroughly disappointed by the fact that she really did struggle. And for the longest time as a teenager, I didn't understand why. And for me, it was a reassuring thing when I became a mom to now my daughter. I've got all the information, and I was still a little bit hesitant. But but I was like, I have to do a little bit better. And it was lovely as well to reconcile with my mom, because those things as a child can form certain wounds about, is there something wrong with me? My body was just doing what, did I do something? And I now you're talking about a midwife to a gynae, so the information is there. How much more in families where nobody is a medic? How much more in families where there is no mom, but it's a dad who can't even relate from
Correct.
a biological, identification in terms of we're very different. And for me, the heart of it was, I didn't want more girls and moms having that relationship fractured, or
that
moms
awkward,
and parents, that awkwardness. And I think also we've complicated it in our brains in thinking, I have to talk to my child about sex. And I'm like, no.
And then there's that pressure.
No.
It's like, how's it going to go? How am I going to shape their definition of
Yeah.
pregnancy and falling pregnant and sex going forward? There is lots of
panic
pressure.
on our children's behalf so much. And I was like, just take a deep breath and have a conversation with your child. And it's incredible how, and fair enough, it is a little bit, it's biased in the fact that it's directed for girls. We are, it's in the pipeline, the boys one is in the pipeline. But it is incredible just how, especially teen girls, all they want is to just see us or hear us say, you're okay.
You're amazing.
You're amazing.
Absolutely.
You're don't worry about that. And it's not just about, and I think for me it was also not, it's yes, period poverty is a big deal, and it should not be so. But there's so much more to that transition from childhood to teenager. Some girls don't really have necessarily issues with their periods, but they've got issues with their weight gain. Some it's issues with, and now what you see a lot more is mental health. We live in such a day that is so highly charged with opinions, social media, how you should be, acceptance, fitting in. And I've always said the home is the place where, our children should feel most loved, most accepted, and especially most validated, because the world is going to try and toy with that. And if that is not intact from home, oh man, it's a slippery slope.
Tough times. You mentioned the word period poverty.
Yeah.
What is period poverty?
So period poverty is, in a nutshell, the fact that in South Africa and many other countries for that matter, something that is as natural as having a period, and your ability, whether, in fact, it doesn't even matter, the age, but your ability to be able to go through that phase of your period with dignity, with confidence, with access to information, and also with access to the resources that, whether be it water, so we're thinking sanitation and hygiene. So it's not just about, do you have a sanitary pad? It's about, can I go, if I have a 5-day period, can I, first of all, do I have the information that informs me about, when I get a little bit of a period pain, that's okay. I can take, a mild painkiller. Is it okay for me? I'm not shamed for being in pain. The second level to it is, when I eventually do get a period, do I have the means to be able to do this with dignity? You find girls who have to use, towels, newspapers, and for something that is so natural that nobody chooses to. And I will always fight it and advocate it from this perspective. If we can afford to supply free condoms,
then why can't we do sanitary wear?
Sexual intimacy is still a choice. It's a personal choice to engage.
Correct, but your period
is not.
So do you think that government should be contributing to bring down the price and the availability of sanitary pads?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And is there conversation with government? Where are we on that sort of level? Or do we just have to depend on the private companies to do these donations of sanitary pads and education? And what is actually out there? Or is it in discussion?
So there's always a lot of discussions. And I've had, a really beautiful privilege to sometimes be part of them. There is an organization that I sometimes work with called I Menstruate, and they're doing some really beautiful work. But one thing that you find, and if the person who is sitting at the top holding the power
is not a woman,
is not, and sometimes they are women, and you know what, again, Amanda, and this is where for me, I always say, it shouldn't be a woman or a man thing.
Correct.
Because men are dads, they are husbands to menstruating women, they are, they have females around them. And I mean, one thing that I specifically did in the book was to get a male perspective. How do you, interact with the females in your space? How can you support? How can you show up in the most meaningful way? And again, it goes back to it's priority. If it's not a priority, particularly to the people who kind of are the movers and shakers and who make things happen, then we have a problem. But I also think, when you look at, privately, we have, and I'm gonna out us on this one. We've got this tendency of self-soothing and pacifying. We walk into Discam, we're like, okay, I'm just going to add, and I'm going to add in, yes,
absolutely,
2 packs,
2 extra packs,
and one of the
feel good about it, right?
And you feel good about it. But when you look, for example, one of the chapters, I go through what actually we should be giving away is I call it a whole experience. It's a nice, cute bag, because you also want to change the culture and the stereotype that periods are shameful. You want to make it cool. You want to make it like, oh gosh, I can't wait for me to get my period.
And I'm going to get it awesome. Like when you have a baby, you want that baby bag. So why not to get a period bag when you have your period?
You have period parties.
Absolutely.
In fact, I've always said, I don't understand what Sweet 16 is. People have these big parties.
Absolutely.
But if we made it a culture or a tradition for ourselves, and people can do this in their own homes, where you get your girls, favorite friends, aunts, and you really have conversations.
And you celebrate each other's womanhood.
You buy her first diamond earrings or something, her first lip gloss, because it is sort of like a transition and an initiation to womanhood. But if we're already starting off on a foot that periods are so bad, they smell, they are to be hidden, and so there is so much more, I think, as women of the country, we can really do, even like I mentioned, simple things like how many girls miss school because of period pains, because of heavy periods. Way too many. So let's educate about, simple analgesia, that's painkillers, whether it's, so that should be, one of the bags that we did, I actually didn't bring it. There's like a pocket for
beautiful
putting the tablet there. There is a slot for putting who is your gynae, who is your confidant, who is the person that we call if you're at school. And I've even said, one day when I've got time to actually fight this fight, if part of school, if they have to have first aid kits in schools, why don't we have period packs in schools? So that if and when something like that happens, I'll never forget, one of my friends literally started a period. I was a son at 5, that's great, I don't know.
7?
7, yeah. And she was sitting right in front. She literally stood up and the whole class could see. And one thing I know for sure is that experience never leaves you.
Never ever.
Never ever leaves you. And so period poverty for me is way more than just
here's a sanitary pad.
Sanitary pad.
Absolutely. Or making a donation here or there. Or now that's an interesting thing that you've spoken about. And we have heard about how we need to focus on the young boys and get them to actually understand and support women when they're going through this period. But for me, I see it as a trend, not just in young boys, completely all the way up until, these males are much older boys, even when they are fathers, going across, not just from the period side of point of view, but from an entire sexual health and well-being point of view. Males have always been alienated when it comes to female wellness. I mean, you think about in the delivery room, the father just stands there. He doesn't know what to do. They've been really pushed out on many, many different things. How do we start incorporating them and actually allowing them to embrace female sexuality and the female form without being like, creepy and pervy, how do we actually get them involved so that they can understand and therefore empower their own sons to go through this whole stage of understanding periods and then dating and then sexual wellness and then being a father? I think it all comes back to that as well.
I think we always fall into the trap of our past societal and cultural nuances. And we are often sometimes even very selective about what we want to, change about, our cultural things. Back in the day, men, and I come from a very traditional Zulu family, so maybe I've got more understanding of that. Men were not allowed to be in the delivery room. And fair enough for multiple reasons, but in this day and age, it's changed. And also, one of the things for me, I see it a lot when I see particularly pregnant couples. I love it when dads bring their daughters to the practice, and we can no longer live in that, men don't want to know, men are not interested. And here's the reality. Like I said, men have families, they live within a community of women, but also we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot when we are not willing to teach, when we're not willing to understand what they are curious about. And in fact, watch the space. And not very soon, but one of the books that I really, really want to get my hands on is writing for men, and it's called Dads Are Pregnant. And it's basically how everybody always thinks of the woman when we're pregnant. Everybody, and I mean, and sometimes we milk it for all it's worth. Of course we do.
Especially that push present as well.
But we forget about asking the questions, what concerns them, what scares them, what they want out of this experience, and being able to give them and empower them with the information. And ultimately, when people don't know, they just like, okay, I'm just going to stand here and do nothing. But it really is on us.
And then we get all grumpy saying that they're not getting involved.
You're not interested, you don't care, and we personalize it. And I'm like, but how will I know if you haven't taught me?
Correct.
And if you haven't made me feel like this is my space too.
And that you want me to be part of it.
That you want me to be a part of it. So I'm glad I'm seeing a bit of a change in, with baby showers, dads are attending now.
Absolutely. A lot of dads, workshops and...
But also a lot of men are like, is it necessary? Does it have to cost this much?
Yes, it's your baby too.
Too much fluff, man.
So on your website, there are really 5 areas of focus. I want to break it down and chat about each of them a little bit.
Sure.
So firstly, talk to me about pregnancy care and obstetrics.
Yes. So,
Tell me, what is obstetrics? How is an obstetrician firstly different from a gynecologist?
Right.
And why are so many obstetricians leaving the country? I heard it has something to do with the insurance, but you can tell me about that.
So obstetrics and gynae, when you do the speciality, you cannot choose one over the other. It comes as a dynamic duo.
Yes.
Obstetrics particularly pertains to the process of preconception, conception, going through the pregnancy, and the postpartum phase. So it is all encompassing in terms of pregnancy. When it comes to gynecology, it's all things relating to women's health. So from teenage years to reproductive to peri and menopause and postmenopause. So it's all things outside of pregnancy relating to basically women's reproductive health, sexual and reproductive health. In terms of why gynae, in obstetrics in particular, unfortunately, and I don't want to be like, the road accident fund, I think is drained now. They're onto the obstetricians. Look, here's something that is very delicate about obstetrics. You're not just looking after one human being.
Correct.
You're looking after 2 lives.
Absolutely.
Right? And obstetrics, as much as, I always say to pregnant women, you're not sick, you're just pregnant.
It's not a disease.
Right? It's not a disease. And yet, women are actually more likely to die from pregnancy than they are from being hit by a car.
I mean, that's frightening. I mean, it's a very delicate and
very
fragile role that you have. You've got a huge responsibility on your shoulders when you are looking after not just the mother, but the whole family.
But the whole family, And so I think that is also why it has become, so we have become probably, I don't know if we're still at the top. I think the plastic surgeons are slowly approaching.
Yes.
But we are one of the most litigated, speciality, because when things go wrong,
the blame is put on you.
We need to know. Yes, no, and here's the because I had the let me say the privilege of being both in state and working in state some time back, and then in private. The nice thing about private care is that you will never get to be kind of seen by an intern, a comserve, a junior per se. You're already being seen by the most senior person. And so in private, when things don't go well, at the very least, you must be able to sit down with the family, go through them because sometimes things will go wrong regardless of you.
And that's life, right?
That's just life. But one of the biggest thing that I found, and I think this also speaks to how we look after people, how we look after women, and particularly how we look after women who are pregnant, is when people know and see that you care, you've been attentive, they felt seen and heard by you throughout the process, even when things don't go well. Yes, it hurts. Yes, there is a grieving process that we may have to go through. And if you have been transparent and allowed them to be, you are partners. It's not a talk down in terms of your care. You will most likely get away with never really being, sued.
And I think that goes back to what you were speaking about in the very beginning about taking the knowledge that you have and translating it into a language that everyone understands, as opposed to very highfalutin technical speak. And that, for me, is what gives a doctor a great bedside manner, is being able to interact.
I want to say this.
People,
a lot of doctors gaslight.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's shocking.
I always feel that you shouldn't be sitting there with a doctor and the doctor telling you what's happening. You should be asking the questions and getting the answers and the feedback that you need, as opposed to, we know that you're so great, you're a doctor, you've got the certificate on the wall, we know that you're so fantastic, but just come down a bit and actually talk to us on our level. We wouldn't be here if you weren't that fantastic.
Absolutely.
I think that's so important there. All right, so that's pregnancy care and obstetrics. Then we move on to gynae consults. Talk to me about, let's go all the way back. Talk to me about your very first gynae consult. You're walking into the gynae's room. What should happen? You come in with your mother, you come in on your own. What should happen?
Ideally, I always say it's always, I'm not offended by people who Google and stuff, even though I'll tell you, Google was not at graduation,
no,
TikTok
100%.
was not at graduation. But I love people who already come with some kind of anticipation in terms of what to expect. They've kind of read a little bit. First and foremost, nothing needs to be wrong for you to go for your gynae consultation. The most important thing is you are developing that relationship. You're trying to find who is your person in the space.
Who's your person, and is it male? Is it female? Are they old? Are they young? Is the same race, same religion?
Absolutely.
I think that's the most important thing.
And something that I've actually seen over the years is you actually can have more than one. You find people who are very comfortable to do pregnancy with a much older gynecologist, but then they're like, no, I'm going to go to somebody a little bit younger, female, if I want my sexual health things sorted out. And that's perfectly okay. Remember, it is entirely up to you to choose the person that resonates with you, because you want to be able to be so comfortable that you can ask all the questions. You can come with the most, whatever you think is most embarrassing, and it's your health after all. So gynae consult, what it entails is, a lot of the times when you're looking for example, with let's say it's a teen, a lot of it generally will focus around just understanding some of the changes that are happening to your body. Can
I stop there? What is the ideal age for a teenager to start going to see a gynecologist?
Right. I'll be honest, Amanda, that question, there is no definitive time. And let's be fair, the reality of it also speaks to access, finances, because the reality is not everybody can afford to go to a gynecologist. And I think it's also okay for us to, you do get general practitioners, for example, who have a special interest in women's health. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I spoke about Professor McIntosh, and if you are in Joburg and you don't know Prof. McIntosh and her clinic, so many women have literally been through her hands. She's not a gynecologist. Her background is she's a nurse, she's a I can't remember if she actually did. No. She didn't do midwifery, but she's women's sexual health and reproductive health, and then became subsequent a sexologist. She's probably better than most gynecologists in terms of handling gynae consultations. And what makes her amazing is not the certificates that's on her wall. It's just her personality and just how much safe her space is. So it is, like I said, it doesn't have to be anything wrong. We would probably go into the menstrual stuff as well if that is an issue. She also taught me something really interesting, because when you think about, I'm going to the gynecologist for something like really big and, no. Actually, she said to me, welcome to Santon. Actually, the thing that you're going to treat the most in terms of gynae consultation is yeast infections and bacterial vaginosis. I'm like, I was, coming out from public health. Absolutely. I was like, what do you mean? And she's like, it is the upper middle classes. And I was like, I didn't get it. She left me there. It took me literally a month to be like, oh, I see.
That's what we do.
And it's because of all the things we want to spray this, we want to push things,
we want to wash,
we want to smell like roses and this and that. And I'm like, guys, a vagina smells like a vagina, smells like a vagina, smells like a vagina, But that's all the information you get to pick up from your gynae, and the better the relationship, the better it is. I love seeing the transition from, I'll see a mom, for example, deliver their first child, their second child, and then they'll be like, oh no, I'm going to bring my mother. So I see somebody who's in their postmenopausal phase, and more of an elderly woman. I'll see their cousins who may be in their teen phases. And then you start seeing sort of like this ripple effect of information that's going around because you did just one thing right. You picked your healthcare provider based on your needs, based on your comfortability, based on what you can afford in terms of accessibility, but also somebody that you can be completely honest about the stuff that's really going on.
And I think I would imagine that a lot of the time, teenagers come to you because their parents have brought them, because they're at that stage where they need to start discussing contraception, which again, should never, ever be pushed in a corner or be a taboo subject. Rather have someone having sex that is protected and have knowledge about what they're doing than having things happen to them because they are shying away from what could happen. And I'm sure that that's one of the things that you need to address very, very often.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it's also, as a mom, it's bridging the gap. I'm like, sometimes you are the auntie that, is less intimidating, and like how your
less
teenagers,
judging,
less. Sometimes you know what? I've really met some amazing moms. It's just sometimes there is that thing of like, I don't want to talk to my mom about,
for sure.
But what I've loved doing as well is using that space as well to integrate that relationship. It's okay if she feels a little bit uncomfortable, and we kind of take the time to talk in private, because that's another important thing. When you go see your healthcare provider, it's a sacred space, it's a private space. Everything that is discussed there is confidential unless you've given consent for me to share.
And there's a reason for you to share.
And what it also does is you start teaching them that your privacy is important. So if I can say, sorry, mom, please, you can outside for a bit. If there's anything that is obviously alarming, I am well discerning to be like, okay, this we need to discuss with mom. And also remember, mom is paying for this consultation. So
you better remember that. Yep.
But the whole thing is you start off with just making them a little bit more relaxed and comfortable. And if women, adult women are scared and intimidated to come to a gynae consultation, how much more do you think teenagers, And a lot of the times we as parents already think of the worst. We think they're having sex, they want to have sex. And sometimes it's just, I really like this boy and I'm feeling a little bit like, is this okay? What does that, sometimes you find teenagers, they haven't quite figured out. Yes, there's so much information out there, but they haven't quite figured out how it works with their own body. And you also want to take the opportunity to encourage them on remember, this is something that is your choice. Nobody should ever coerce you. So now you are teaching them about consent, how to practice consent, how to differentiate between privacy and secrecy. There's now where like really ugly things happen to children and they don't know how to articulate themselves because they've been taught, do not speak unless you are spoken to and stuff. So we are doing so much more than just, it's a gynae consultation or it's a conversation with your daughter about, their bodies. You are empowering this person to have agency for themselves, to be able to advocate for themselves regardless of the situation that they find them in, whether with an older boy or an uncomfortable situation where they can say, my no is a no, is a no, is a no.
And I think that's so powerful to be able to stand in your own shoes and validate your decisions.
Yes.
Because they're empowered decisions and that's really what's backing up your decisions, which is my next area of concern. So we've almost touched on it now, but teen health. My question for you on teen health is their rate of teenage pregnancy just as alarming in the rest of the world as it is in South Africa? Is it a South African typical problem, these very young teenage pregnancies, or is it a worldwide issue?
It is definitely a worldwide issue. And I mean, I'm not a politician or a journalist in terms of, the exact numbers and details. And one of the things that you really, really, again, I'm going to touch on the fact that, when you've been exposed to both the public sector and the private sector, it's all about access. And some of these things, it is unfortunate that it boils down to the people who can afford and the people who cannot. Do you know there's a lot of teenage pregnancies that is happening in very affluent spaces?
Absolutely.
It's just taken care of very privately, very quietly, very, there's somebody there who's going to say, are you ready for this? If not, let us hear other options. One of the devastating things when you look at the teenage pregnancy, they happen in the communities that are most poverty stricken. Why? Because these are the kids, and I remember when I used to work in a hospital called Leratong, whenever I would get teenage girls, I would then say, I want to do sort of like a consult, because generally sometimes they would just be seen by juniors and one of the things that, one of the myths that we have, we think girls that fall pregnant are not interested in a career. We think girls that are pregnant predominantly fall pregnant from much older guys. No, a lot of teenagers actually fall pregnant from
their boyfriend.
From peer. Sometimes not even a boyfriend. Well, now there's situationships and things. It's peer.
It's exploring.
It's exploring, but it's exploring without accurate or complete information because very often they are not being parented.
Correct.
Very often they come from families where there's either one parent who wakes up very early to go and get the little that they can get, working
to put food on the
terrible
table.
hours. By the time they come back, these kids are doing homework on their own. These are the children who are going to schools where there is no sense of creative stimulation. One of the things I did with my daughter, I was like, how do I keep you away from boys? You can't be like, don't
chain her up.
And one of the best things, and I think I do touch on it, is the whole thing of doing things like a vision board with your child or with teenagers. You are stimulating what life could look like from a very young age. And when you do that, you kind of work backwards and say, now the steps that you take between now and there, suddenly it is directed. A lot of these kids, shame, they don't have any creative stimulation, even the ones that are good and have some kind of creative, in them, whether they are good in dancing or drama, there isn't a proper school that allows for that talent to blossom. There isn't anybody who's saying, hey, I see you, you're brilliant as an artist.
Let's take you to the next level.
Let's take you to the next level. And so what happens is they've got time in their hands. They are then either on their screens, in terms of phones or TV, and they are very easily and remember, teenagers are very influenced by what's currently going on, and here's the other thing that is biological that I think we sometimes are too quick to be blaming on the teenagers instead of saying it's our problem. We should be doing, what are we doing about it? Is the fact that, do you know that the prefrontal cortex, which is basically the part of your brain that makes decisions based on, so it's, if I, for example, if you say to me, girl, let's go party after this, and we'll come back at 4 o'clock in the morning. If I know I've got a C-section first thing in the morning tomorrow, I'm going to say, my love, I love you. Let's do it on Saturday. Because, so the ability to think ahead and to reason and make decisions that positively impact you in the future, that part of the brain only develops properly by the time you're like 24, end of adolescent. But the part of the brain that is responsible for your emotions, for your feelings, and by the way, as a teenager, both boys and girls, this is also the time where your hormones are like a tsunami. You're going from nothing to just sort of like this whirlwind of, if nobody has spoken to you about your changing body, if nobody has told you as a boy child, you've got 20 times more testosterone, you are gonna see a girl and feel some type of way. How do we channel that in the right direction?
I think that being a teen now is very, very complicated and confusing, because you've just spoken about how you're going to have these feelings of being a male and a female, but now there's the other element that's coming in schools, wrongly or rightfully so, about, you know, this gender fluidity, unisex bathrooms, this whole approach to male versus female. And you know, you spoke about how the frontal cortex really is only developed by the age of 20, 24, somewhere there. And yet at this stage, there are people in our society, and there are doctors in our society who are doing these gender transformations when kids are hitting puberty. And I think for me, it's very, very confusing about what is the right thing, what is the wrong thing. You know, that's just another whole conversation we could have on its own. But I think for you, also as a practitioner, educating people on teen sexuality, it just throws in a whole new mix of things, especially when children aren't explained why these things are happening. They're just told that there's this gender fluidity, that there's unisex bathrooms now at your toilet, but they're in schools, but they actually aren't educated on the why, the hows, the ifs and the whats. And I think that goes down to the education side of things as well. So very, very difficult. Things have changed.
They actually took the time to kind of put a little bit of what do you call it? You know, like meanings of words when it comes to that. I know a lot of parents can get very uncomfortable. And the reason why we get uncomfortable is because nothing in our lives lives in a vacuum.
Correct.
Our sexuality intersects with our values, intersects with our religion, intersects with our cultural nuances, and also in a very big way intersects with politics. Because I think we always have to think to yourself, who's behind this? I think the simplest way is, let us be present in our children's lives, and without being judgy, let's hear them out. And one thing I've learned about teenagers is when you give them the space to be and to be who they are, it's a trade-off between, let's wait for this until, you know, my daughter asked me for a social media account, and I said, not yet. But it wasn't like, no, you will never be, because then what happens is she goes in secret and she kind of does it.
Absolutely.
But you say to her, I say to her, when you are at a particular age, I think it'll be a good idea. But in the meantime, I want you to write me an essay about what do you want to do on social media, and how are you going to influence people with your page.
It's the thinking about it again. It goes back to mindfulness. Why are you doing things as opposed to just doing it because it's the trend and everyone says that they should be doing it? Okay, so we've been through 4 different topics now. The last topic I want to discuss with you now in terms of an area of focus is intimacy. Let's talk intimacy through all the stages. When you first meet a boy and you have intimacy, right all the way up to intimacy in menopause, and obviously the intimacy that happens when you are pregnant and starting a new family, because there's so many things that change in that. Let's talk intimacy.
Right. One of the first things let me say, my starting point when it comes to intimacy, yes, there is the culture, the way that we are socialized, and the the gender bias when it comes to, how there is sort of like a permissiveness when it comes to, males, and sort of like an inhibition when it comes to women. But at the core of it, for me, it's also when you look at, I've often said, let me ask you, when I say sex, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Fun.
Okay, you are the wrong person to ask. I mean, whenever I would ask people about when you think sexual intimacy or sexual health, what do they think? They're thinking STIs, HIV, unplanned pregnancies. And whilst those are true, I love Chimamanda says something incredible. She says, stereotypes, it's not that stereotypes are not true, it's that they are an incomplete story. And so the focus becomes on all the negative outcomes from sexual intimacy, but nobody wants to talk about the good stuff. And so I feel like we've given sex a really bad talk in front of everybody, and yet behind closed doors, everybody is like,
everyone's,
I want some.
Absolutely.
And I want good some, for that matter.
Correct. And I think you've just touched on something important. I think it's important that, as you've said, society has just been, okay, well, sex is about procreation, it's about having another generation. And we haven't put in the fact that there's the fun side to it, the pleasure side, in fact, and that's what's missing.
The biggest driving force for sexual intimacy, probably 80% of the time, pleasure. That's it.
So why as society are we always shunning it, putting it behind doors? Why do we have sex parties where you pull out your sex toys, or people are selling sex toys and it's all big fun and giggles and laugh, laugh, laugh? It's because it's been so taboo and it's been so behind. Why are we not, again, as you spoke about periods, why are we not celebrating the good things? Why are we just seeing it as something that's not to be discussed?
A lot of the time it's because we've never been taught and given the language to be able to speak about sexual intimacy in a way that feels comfortable but appropriate. We always think if we're talking about sex, it's dirty.
And people are going to think you're a sex addict.
And I think that's probably one of the, I don't want to say, like, as I kind of get into more of a mature phase in my career, I do really foresee spending more time in that space, whether it's with individuals, whether it's with couples, because I see how just on the basis of communication, just on the basis of understanding also the different wirings between genders, between generations, between personalities, and it boils down to, can I communicate effectively, with respect, appropriate to whoever I am having that conversation with, and still get my point across? And if we are able to do that, I often said, if you think about all the vernacular languages, when you think of vulva and vagina, it doesn't have good names. They're all sort of, and we often use these very names as swear or sort of like insults to one another. So how do I, it's like hitting your child with the hand that you want to love them with.
Correct.
It's like, you're confusing me.
How do you change the perception? Very, very much so.
So I love the fact that in this day and age, the beautiful thing is there is a lot more conversation about it. And I'm forever grateful for having had the opportunity to study the science behind it, because I think also that gives, I almost want to say, it gives sex credibility.
Yes.
Man. Like, people think you just kind of wing this thing, and if you're terrible at it, then you're doomed. And I'm like, no. There is a science behind it.
Correct.
We can explain a lot of the things that are happening. And also, you're not supposed to be born swinging on chandeliers. How do you tell, particularly when it comes to women, how do you tell a woman for the longest time, close your legs, go to school, then find it, and then it's like, now find a nice guy, have a child, and a house, 2 picket fence and 2 dogs. And it's like, well, why should I be invested in this thing that has never been something that feels like it is for me? It always feels like it's about someone else. It's about bringing something else to life, whether it's a child.
It's almost like it's a duty.
It's like
your kids,
and a lot of women find it like that. And so the conversations are really, really happening. They are stimulating. I can't say too much about the space, but something incredible is coming.
Phenomenal.
Pertaining to this. So we're getting better. and women are having better orgasms.
And why shouldn't we?
Why
right?
shouldn't we?
Why shouldn't we?
We are faking orgasms,
Correct.
yes. Which is, you know.
We need to find our self-pleasure, and that comes, I believe, from a young age. It's all part of exploring yourself, taking a mirror, putting it between your legs,
absolutely,
knowing what you have down there to give you pleasure and to give you more life, of course. Absolutely. I think that's very important. So I'm looking very forward to that chapter. That's going to be a very exciting one. That kind of deals with contraception after children.
Yes.
Do you have to take contraception straight after having your first child if you are planning to have a second and a third child? Or do you believe that you should wait? What are the effects of contraception? And I'm talking about whether it's a condom, whether it's whatever it is, whether it's hormones, whatever it is. When should you start taking contraception again after having your first child?
Right. So here's the reality. I think our bodies are like real machines. Mm-hmm. So post-delivery, especially if somebody is breastfeeding, exclusive breastfeeding, it does have an impact in terms of suppressing ovulation. Mm-hmm. That's because of the prolactin, which is a hormone that stimulates breast milk, basically. So we often say, so postpartum, we have like a 7-day checkup, which is, very often no woman generally wants to get, anywhere near, right? And then we have the 6-week checkup. Yes, it's still part of what's happening in terms of, if you've had a C-section, have you healed, But the biggest thing with that 6-week is the fact that we start discussing contraception. And every woman is different. And like I said, some women choose to breastfeed, some choose not to. Mm-hmm. Some choose to breastfeed exclusively, some kind of mix. And the reality is, as a gynae, you don't know when this person's cycle is going to kick in. And so in the backdrop, you are thinking to yourself, and here's the important thing, child spacing. Uh-huh. You may want to have a child one after the other, but remember your body has just gone through like 9 months of literally take over by this other human being. And I know that in as much as people may want to have, their children sort of like stagger.
Get it over and done with.
Get it over. There's no such a thing. First of all, there's no such a thing as you bounce back to your old self. You will never be the same.
I thought that was true.
You will never be the same. You might be able to get back to some kind of a weight that, you used to be with a lot of hard work, but no pressure. Don't do that to yourself.
I always said, becoming a mother, it's a proper metamorphosis from being a woman to becoming a mom. Everything changes.
Everything changes. Even your money changes.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
All of a sudden, it's like, I can't spend this on me and me alone. But here's the reality. And I think it's allowing, I always say postpartum is the most neglected phase of a woman.
Correct.
People will give you a whole lot of empathy whilst you're still pushing your belly and you cutesy and the minute you deliver, work once you're back as soon as possible. And yet the transition from just that phase of pregnancy onwards is really, it can take anything between 6 months to 12 months. But also you've got another human being here. You want to give yourself time and space to find each other, find your rhythm with this new person.
Correct.
And by the way, firstborns don't like you guys just sort of like doing these 2 under 2s. We give us some time to be a child.
Correct.
So it's your physical body. It is child spacing so that your next pregnancy is also healthy. You're not like sort of hormones on top of another. So back to your question, contraception, 6 weeks, that's when we discuss an appropriate contraceptive for you. And I think if you are somebody, even if you do want to have children close enough, and this is where now the type of contraception. So for example, if you're thinking to yourself, geez, dude, I'm 37 already. I'd be okay with just getting the next one. If you've had a normal vaginal delivery, a year and a half or so, that's fine. C-section, we still want to give you 2 years because that scar needs to heal. Don't go in too quickly. It can be quite risky. So you then want to say, all right, if you want it quicker, let's give you something that is more short term. And then you get contraceptives that we call long-acting reversible. So this is the girl who's like, they've had number 1 and they're like, I'm never coming back here.
Meantime, you know. Yeah.
And then you're like, it's okay. Let's give you 2 to 3 years, 4, 5 years or
Things
so.
can change.
Things can change. And if they've got time on their hands, they're in their 20s, early 30s, by all means, you can then discuss something like whether it's a hormonal intrauterine device. That one is also nice because you can give it you can give it as early as 6 weeks, whereas anything that's got estrogen in it, we have to wait for that 4 months period because you don't want to risk blood clotting or blood clots. And so that's why very often we will prescribe at your 6 weeks, even if you want a pill, we'll prescribe a progestin only pill until you're about 4 months. But contraception is not the villain. I think sometimes it's another one. I think there's sex at the top and then contraception. Oh, it's so bad. It will make me fat. And sometimes we neglect how much contraception has really, particularly as women, given us the options to really decide when and how we want to procreate. The trick to it, again, just like finding your gynae, with your healthcare provider, we've got a whole long list. You're not married to any type of contraceptive. If it doesn't sit well with you, great, let's change it.
It's amazing that in today's age, we've actually got choices of what we can do.
Change it. But I think the hardest thing is feeling like having a child is something you didn't have a choice about. It was unplanned. It was you were kind of thrown in the depths of it. And I'm like, that is literally worse than having a house bond. You are tied for 25 years
and beyond.
So I think when we look at all these topics from a perspective of it must work for me. I'm not a slave to it. I am not being coerced. It works for me. Sexual pleasure must work for me. Contraceptive must work for me, my quality of life. And I think when we go with that attitude, and the more information we have, the more accurate information we have, the more of these conversations we're having, it makes those decisions so much easier.
So we've gone through the whole stage of life, but what has become very apparent now is that menopause is a huge topic. And it's almost, I think, we love social media, we hate social media, but it has definitely brought out the conversation of getting to that next stage in life, because there's so much talk about pregnancy and families and babies. But there's almost, again, a taboo of, okay, what is menopause? What do I need to do? Where am I going with it? And starting earlier in life, having those baseline hormone tests so that by the time you do get to menopause, you know what you need to replace those hormones back to. When typically does menopause start, and how do you know that you are in fact in menopause?
Right. So menopause by definition, in terms of when on average it happens between 48 and 52 years of age, but you can get sort of like outliers, and this very much is influenced by your genetics. So ask your mom, ask the women in your family when they menopause. Where we are concerned is when menopause happens before 40 years.